Hi, my name is Mackenzie, and fun fact about me, I am amazing at time management, and I got this video out on Halloween just like I wanted. Anyways, Joseph Smith was a poor farm boy who wanted to know the truth about God. He was humble, pure of heart, and never sought to take advantage or profit off of anyone by being the prophet. Except Joseph Smith was a literal fucking gold digger. Like his grubby little hands in the earth, clawing at it, salivating like Gollum looking for the ring. Except instead of a ring or any treasure, he found nothing, save a couple of cool looking rocks. And yet he sold that big nothing burger as a religion from which he proceeded to extract money, political power, and underage girls. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's get into it. My testimony of Joseph Smith was already crumbling by the time I left the Mormon church, and after I left and finally read a fucking history book or two, I solidified my opinion that not only was he not a great person, he was a really shitty one. Early on, I downloaded the book Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview by D. Michael Quinn, and here's the thing. I think I got about halfway through before giving up. I really tried, though. It's a very academic, scholarly work. He is very smart, very thorough, and he uses a lot of big words. I just needed something a lot more simple with a lot more pictures. But this book is cited in almost every single source that I used for this video, and Quinn has done some really amazing work as a Mormon historian, and even was a believing member after he was excommunicated from the church. So if you're not a dum-dum like me, I do suggest this book. But I will link the other sources I used below, as they are a much easier read. And if you haven't watched my first video on Joseph Smith and his polygamy practices, I highly recommend you do that. In my opinion, the grooming of minors was the worst thing Joseph Smith did, but the second worst thing he did was taking advantage of everyone around him financially. First, let's talk about Joseph Smith's family's magical beliefs that still influence the church today. I want to make it known that I am not making fun of these beliefs. A lot of various religions and spiritual practices have magical elements to them. It's just that Mormons are completely in denial about it, but I think if they admitted to being witches, they would bring in a whole fresh new crowd. On mormonstories.org it says, the Smith family created various parchments likely used to channel mystical energies. The symbols appear to have been copied from occult handbooks, including Francis Barrett's The Magus, published in 1801. One primary parchment was titled Holiness to the Lord, the same title affixed above temple entrances today. The Magus is a ceremonial magic handbook that was compiled by occultist Francis Barrett, published in 1801. And yeah, I didn't know the description of Holiness to the Lord stemmed from this book, but it is indeed carved into every LDS temple built today. On the church's website, it has an article about this phrase, Holiness to the Lord, and it's basically a bunch of vague paragraphs stating that this phrase is about Jesus, but not one mention of this parchment. Shocker. Joseph also used handkerchiefs as a healing tool. In 1837, Latter-day Saint apostles wrote, many scores of persons were healed by our sending a handkerchief to them. In 1839, Smith gave a handkerchief to a faithful member to alleviate his sick child, suggesting that the cloth would deliver healing powers. Mormons use handkerchiefs today when they dedicate temples, and I have done this a few times in my life. You have a white cloth and you go, Hosanna, Hosanna to God and the Lamb, and you chant that a few times. I did not enjoy it as a child or as an adult.
Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna to God and the Lamb. Amen, amen, and amen.
Joseph Smith also had a magical cane with astrological symbols carved into it and a serpent's head on the top of it. This cane was used because Joseph walked with a limp. Remember that for later. And when he and Hiram died, wood was stripped from their caskets, turned into canes, given to various church leaders, and blessed in temples. The ivory knob has a lock of Joseph Smith's hair in it. In an 1857 sermon, Heber C. Kimball, who was a Mormon apostle, stated that the day will come when there will be multitudes who will be healed and blessed through the instrumentality of those canes, and the devil cannot overcome those who have them, in consequence of their faith and confidence in the virtues connected with them. File that in another failed prophecy folder. I really want to do an entire video on Mormon prophecies because they get away with just saying so much shit that never happens. Speaking of astrological symbols, Joseph owned a Jupiter talisman that he reportedly kept on his person the day he died. This talisman was carved with symbols exactly as depicted depicted in the Magus book, just like the parchments the Smith family owned. D. Michael Quinn said that the talisman was supposed to grant a decisive victory over enemies, to defend against machinations, and to inspire the wearer thereof with the most remarkable confidence. Wearing something on your body at all times as a source of protection. Hello? Garments didn't protect me from shit, but Mormons are definitely supposed to wear those at all times, and they are supposed to protect them from evil. It is disputed whether or not Joseph Smith actually owned this talisman, as it's not declared in something that was on his body the day he died. At the time of his death, it isn't listed in any of the other things he had, but Emma Smith's second husband's son had this talisman, or a silvery piece, and said that it belonged to Joseph Smith. So I think it's highly possible, but we have proof for all the other magic stuff he owned, so I'm not super worried about it. Side note, Brigham Young also owned a bloodstone amulet that his niece said he wore as a necklace for protection. Like I said, I don't actually think it's particularly strange to believe in magical objects, to each their own, but Mormons really don't want you calling it that. It's spiritual, not magical. It's sacred. It's not witchcraft. You guys don't know that one religious kid in your school who wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter because of all the witchcraft in it? There was a kid at my LDS private school whose mom did not allow him to read those books, and they also were not allowed to celebrate Halloween for the same reasons. Little did they know, Joseph Smith was into that shit. Just think of all the fun Mormons don't get to have because of lies. You can still be a believing member, believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and that he also practiced folk magic, and that is incorporated in his teachings today. I'm not going to, but you can. I mean, if you've seen my temple video, there's a ton of witchy stuff that goes on in there, but because it's all white, it's not witchy. Imagine that ceremony, but they're wearing all black. I'd be kind of interested in it, actually. And a prayer that you have to say exactly the right way, or it won't work, is an incantation. That's a spell. Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa. The sacrament prayer that the Mormon congregation prays to every Sunday must be said exactly as written, verbatim, or they have to do it over. Any baptism, whether for a living person or a dead person, the ceremony must be said as written, or you have to redo it. And the tokens you get in the temple and repeat back to the temple worker must be said exactly as written. That's fucking magic, bitch! And magic is super cool, but cults are not. Joseph Smith's dad owned a dagger inscribed with occult symbols on it, which I think is kind of badass. But he would use this knife to draw circles on the ground as part of an enchantment during their treasure digging rituals, which we will get into momentarily. And last but not least of the favorited magical objects of Joseph Smith was his seer stones. We have a photograph of one of these stones that the church owns and has owned for centuries, but only revealed it to the public within the last decade. Historians think Joseph had about 3 stones in total, and Joseph Smith's dad said he got his first one at about 14. Historians think it was closer to 16. Look, I love a shiny rock as much as the next girl. Okay, I still see cool rocks on hikes, and I'm like, I want that. But I have yet to defraud people or start an entire religion with one of them. It's actually not hard to do. It was only in 2013, a couple hundred years after the fact, that they posted the first ever pictures of just one of these stones that the church has. Before that, this rumor would have been considered anti-Mormon and was only mentioned a couple of times previously in publications you had to pay for, like the church's official magazine, The Ensign, which wrote about the seer stone in 1974. Apologists will often say the church is transparent about the seer stones because of these random ass articles that were never talked about openly ever. And every single painting of Joseph Smith that hung in chapels and still do to this day depict Joseph Smith with the golden plates looking at them directly to translate them. No rock in sight. I did not know until after I left the church that this is how it went down. That's embarrassing. I know someone who left the church because she got so bored in Sunday school that she started reading the footnotes, looking up the sources in those footnotes, and then going to those and reading that, and then she finally started learning the real shit. That's sad. You shouldn't have to look up the truth about your church's history in small print footnotes, buried on a website, or in dusty thrifted magazines. That is not a church that is transparent. And if I could give anything to Mormon apologists this Christmas, it would be a dictionary, so they could look up what words like transparent mean. And also the word doctrine, that's a big one. And these stones lead us to Joseph Smith's favorite pastime, which was treasure digging. Before becoming the founder of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith was a known treasure digger, which is something the church failed to mention to me in every single Sunday school lesson I ever had, but they reluctantly admit to today. The only context they ever used to put treasure digging in was that because Joseph claimed to have unearthed the golden plates, aka the Book of Mormon, that the rumor he was a treasure digger was started then as a way for the evil townspeople to discredit and make fun of him. Except that Joseph Smith had been on a total of 18 treasure digs during his life until he finally found the golden plates. So what exactly is treasure digging? In modern terms, it was a get-rich-quick scheme, an MLM, if you will. Treasure diggers overpromised and severely underdelivered. On the church website it says, Joseph was reputed by some of his neighbors to be a seer, someone who could look into a special stone and find lost or hidden objects. Seeing and seers were part of the culture in which Joseph Smith grew up. Some people in the early 19th century believed it was possible for gifted individuals to see lost objects by means of material objects such as stones. Joseph Smith and his family, like many around them, accepted these familiar folk practices. In the 1820s, a fascination with purported Spanish treasure deposits led prospectors like Josiah Stowell to enlist the aid of seers like Joseph in their search for treasure. We'll get to Josiah Stowell in a second, but essentially, some people in America, not too long ago, used to think that ancient treasure was buried and protected by spirit guardians, sometimes pirates, sometimes Native Americans, sometimes toads or salamanders. And to get to this treasure, it required a seer, like Joseph, to tell you where it was. And then once you were at the spot, magical incantations and rituals were required for the curse to be lifted so that you could access the treasure. Joseph would put one of his magical rocks in a top hat, bury his face in it to block out the light, and then he claimed that the stone would light up and show him where to dig. I'm not sure if it was like a GPS turn-by-turn situation or just a visual of where it was underground. He was not clear on that. But people like Stowell would pay Joseph to tell him where the treasure was buried, and they would dig up huge man-sized holes, like this exact one dug up by Joseph and the gang on Miners Hill, only to turn up nothing. No treasure was ever found on these digs. Not only was time and money wasted, but we have 3 different contemporary accounts of people saying Joseph Smith sacrificed dogs during these digs. And in psychology, they tell you one of the first signs of a psychopath is animal abuse. Just saying. Kyle Lewis, who was Joseph's wife's Emma Smith's cousin, said, quote, "The facts are that the sacrifice of white dogs, black sluts, black cats, and such like was an indispensable part of appendage of the art which Smith, the embryo prophet, was then practicing. He claimed to possess the supernatural power of second sight or to see things at a distance, and deep underground, and his frequent references to the enchantment proves that he was a conjurer, a sorcerer, which Webster defines as an enchanter, and sorcery as witchcraft or intercourse with the devil. It is hard to believe that men of common intelligence could believe that Smith could thus see and believe in his conjuration, be so foolish as to spend thousands of dollars in such a way." Yeah, so Heil here makes a couple of great points, which is that dealing with enchantments is some Harry Potter shit. And I still think witchcraft is cool as hell, but Joseph was just really, really bad at it. The second great point that Heil makes is that treasure digging was a known scam and had been for a very, very long time. Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "There are among us great numbers of honest artificers and laboring people who, fed with the vain hope of growing suddenly rich, neglect their business almost to the ruining of themselves and families, and voluntarily endure abundance of fatigue in a fruitless search after imaginary hidden treasure. At length a mighty hole is dug, and perhaps several cartloads of earth thrown out, but alas, no kag or iron pot is found, no seaman's chest crammed with Spanish pistols or weighty pieces of eight." Then they conclude that through some mistake in the procedure, some rash word spoke, or some rule of art neglected, the guardian spirit had power to sink it deeper into the earth and convey it out of their reach. Was Thomas Jefferson just anti-Mormon? I think not, as he said this almost 100 years before Joseph Smith was born. Treasure digging was not a cutesy, something people did in a Goonies-like fashion. It dealt in witchcraft, magic, curses, and the boy who lived to tell the tale. Well, call me fucking Dolores Umbridge, because that boy is lying. And don't tell me Joseph Smith would have been a Slytherin, because I'm a Slytherin and I take offense to that. I think he would have been a Ravenclaw, but like a really shady one like Gilderoy Lockhart. Well, now that Gen Z is gone, I want to emphasize what Thomas Jefferson said, which is that the guardian spirit had power to sink it deeper into the earth if they did the ritual wrong. Here are some direct quotes from the Book of Mormon. Helaman chapter 13 verse 31. And behold, the time cometh that he curseth your riches, that they become slippery, that ye cannot hold them, and in the days of your poverty ye cannot retain them. Verse 35 and 36. Yea, we have hid up our treasures, and they have slipped away from us because of the curse of the land. Oh, that we had repented in the day that the word of the Lord came unto us, for behold, the land is cursed, and all things are become slippery, and we cannot hold them. Again, in Mormon 1:18, it says, And these Gadianton robbers who were among the Lamanites did infest the land, insomuch that the inhabitants thereof began to hide up their treasures in the earth, and they became slippery, because the Lord had cursed the land, that they could not hold them nor retain them again. The Gadianton robbers were some bad guys in the Book of Mormon. I don't have time to explain it. But yeah, this verse specifically talks about ancient Native Americans burying treasure and not being able to find it again. Have you ever been so mad that you started laughing? Because that's how this makes me feel. I was very familiar with these slippery treasure verses growing up, but I never knew what they meant. I was told that it was metaphorical and that God can take away your wealth at any time, but it's pretty clear that Joseph Smith incorporated his treasure digging beliefs into the Book of Mormon, and instead of just admitting that there was no treasure to begin with, he was like, yeah, I guess the land is just like cursed, but the treasure is definitely real and like definitely exists. Joseph claimed to have supernatural powers, and people looking to strike it rich paid him for these powers, and they always turned up empty-handed. But Joseph would keep the money. He did this so often that he was finally put on trial for it, which brings us back to Josiah Stowell. On the LDS Church's website, it says, in 1826, Josiah Stowell hired Joseph Smith to help look for lost Spanish silver near the border of New York and Pennsylvania. Someone in the community, possibly a member of Stowell's extended family, accused Joseph of gazing into a stone to discover lost property. As a result, Joseph was ordered to appear before Justice of the Peace Albert Neely in Shenango County, likely on charges of disorderly conduct. His arrest appears to have been based on a statute in New York state law outlawing pretending to discover where lost goods may be found. So Stowell's nephew, Peter Bridgman, saw that his uncle was being taken advantage of and is the one that brought this to court. Bridgman said, quote, Mr. Stowell is represented as being not a very bright man, but he had saved considerable money for those times, and Joe Smith managed to get and spend most of it. I mean, it's like the 19th century email from a Saudi prince asking for your banking information so he can wire you $100,000. You're like, no guys, he's a real prince. We're gonna start a life together and you're gonna look so dumb. And everyone else is like contemplating calling the cops, which is what Bridgman did. But despite this, Stowell still wholeheartedly believed in Joseph Smith's powers. Stowell said that the reason they never found anything during these digs was because the money moved down beyond their reach. Another witness, Jonathan Thompson, also said that during a dig, he struck his spade upon probably the chest, but on account of an enchantment, the trunk kept settling away from under them while digging. Yeah, definitely not a rock. Okay, they for sure hit an old treasure chest, and it literally slipped through their fingers because God wouldn't let them have it. Duh. Joseph Smith's own dad defended him at trial and said that both he and his son were mortified that this wonderful power which God had so miraculously given him should be used only in search of filthy lucre. He said in his constant prayer to his heavenly Father was to manifest his will concerning this marvelous power. Everyone's like, guys, he has powers, trust me. The fact that he's never found anything is irrelevant. Even the church thinks that Joseph Smith had a gift and was not defrauding these people. And although Joseph's friend and quite possible co-conspirator Oliver Cowdery said that Joseph was acquitted of these charges, court documents say differently. The docket entry says, and therefore the court find the defendant guilty. And I would love to show you the photo of this, but the link to the Joseph Smith Papers project is not working, which pisses me off. I don't know what's going on, but this project was supposed to be the church's attempt at being transparent for once in their whole lives, and I still can't find the original court documents. I'll post this link in my sources, and if it starts working for you guys, or you find the court documents somewhere else, please let me know. But the only record I could find is one posted in a couple of places showing the charge of misdemeanor against Joseph Smith, who is defined as the glass looker. Glass was just another word for a rock. Either way, the outcome of this trial was nothing. He did not go to jail, and the church says this may have been due to his young age. He was 20 years old. I don't know about you, but I never committed fraud when I was 20. I was busy being indoctrinated by the Mormon Church. So what did Joe do instead of serving prison time? The church website says, in his testimony, Joseph readily agreed he had used his seer stone off and on to look for lost property, but he had given up the practice. It hurt his eyes, he said. So it hurt his eyes, and he totally swore off treasure digging, except he continued to treasure dig after the trial, well into 1827. And then he eventually found a treasure, protected by a spirit guardian, and used seer stones to translate. I feel like maybe Joseph got increasingly angry that he, one, never found anything, and two, was being called a fraud who didn't actually have any powers. And he was like, I'll show you. I'm gonna find something so real and so cool, and it's gonna prove for once and all that I'm not lying. Except you can't see it. Nobody can see it. Not even my wife. Not even the 3 witnesses who saw it with their spiritual eyes. My super real golden plates are proof, and it's a big bummer that you can't see them. Also, I want you to remember that Joseph Smith claimed to be visited by Angel Moroni in 1823, but was not allowed to actually get the plates until 1827. So if the argument is that he was only treasure digging because he was looking for the plates, that's not what Joseph claims. Joseph said Moroni showed him exactly where these plates were located the first night he talked to him, but that he could not have them yet for another 4 years. Here's what Joseph said the first time he saw the plates. Having removed the earth, I obtained a lever, which I got fixed under the edge of the stone, and with a little exertion raised it up. I looked in, and there indeed did I behold the plates, the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate, as stated by the messenger. The box in which they lay was formed by laying stones together in some kind of cement. In the bottom of the box were laid 2 stones crossways of the box, and on these stones lay the plates and the other things with them. The Urim and Thummim are 2 seer stones that Joseph said he found with the plates, and he also sometimes called them Nephite interpreters, which some people said looked like glasses, although again, no one was allowed to see them. Darn it! I made an attempt to take them out, but was forbidden by the messenger, and was again informed that the time for bringing them forth had not yet arrived. Neither would it until 4 years from that time. But he told me that I should come to that place precisely in 1 year from that time, and that he would there meet with me, and that I should continue to do so until the time should come for obtaining the plates. So he said that every year he would receive instruction and intelligence from the angel, telling him exactly how the church was to be conducted in the last days, which is rich for someone who clearly did not know what the hell he was doing. So Joseph Smith and the LDS Church claim that the day he first saw these plates and obtained them 4 years later was on September 22nd. What they fail to mention is that September 22nd is the autumnal equinox, which is when the earth is tilted in such a way that day is equal to night, and spiritually this day is believed to be when the veil is thinnest between the spirit world and the human world. So it makes sense that Joseph would pick this day to talk to an angel from God. Again, not that weird of a belief, just freaking own it. And Joseph's story about these events at Hill Cumorah, which is where he claimed to have found the plates, changes depending on who he was talking to. He told Oliver Cowdery that he was electrically shocked 3 separate times the first time he tried to get the plates, and that the spirit guardian said he had not kept the commandments and that's why he couldn't have them. He told his friend Joseph Knight that he was supposed to bring his oldest brother Alvin with him next time, and then he could obtain the plates. Well, unfortunately, Alvin passed away a few short months after this first visit, but Joseph was still determined to follow the angel's commandment. In her biography, Lucy Mack Smith said that Alvin told Joseph before he died, quote, "Do everything that lies in your power to obtain the record. Be faithful in receiving instruction and in keeping every commandment that is given you." We have a newspaper article dated September 29th, 1834. This is just 5 days after Joseph was supposed to go back and talk to Moroni again and either get the plates or talk to the angel again, depending on which version of the story he's going with. His own father wrote a public notice, which is like the old day version of like a notes app apology on someone's Instagram story. Joseph Smith Sr. stated that rumors had been circulating that Alvin's grave had been dug up and his body was missing. He was like, "Hey guys, that really hurts my feelings. Why would you say that? I had to invite my neighbors over, dig up the grave myself, and prove to them that my son was still there. Thanks a lot, guys." A couple problems with this. If someone had actually dug up that grave, you would be able to tell. The ground would be moved and it would be obvious that someone had dug it up and repatched it. You could just point and say, "Hey, do you see all that grass and shit? Yeah, that hasn't been touched since he died." So the theory theory that some people have, me included, is that Joseph Smith and his dad had dug up Alvin's grave and took his corpse to Hill Cumorah to obey the angel's commandment and try to get the plates. The timing lines up, as Joseph said that he went every 4 years on September 22nd, and it was posted September 29th. And Joseph's dad did not need to do all that if he was innocent. He literally tried to cover up his cover up. I mean, if he was killing dogs, I don't think your brother's dead body would be that much of a stretch. And Joseph's dad came in for the save once again to protect his sweet little boy and enable his delusions that his seeing powers were real, this angel was real, and they were about to get really rich, and they definitely did not practice necromancy. On Joseph's final attempt to get the plates on September 22nd, 1827, Joseph Knight said that the right person Joseph Smith was supposed to bring was his wife Emma. So she was actually with him, except she had her back turned the entire time, and she never saw anything. Knight said that Joseph Smith wore black, borrowed his black horse and black carriage for the ride over. A lot of black, again, dark magic, I dig it. We do have a receipt for black paint that Joseph had purchased a few days before all of this. And once he got out the stone box that all of this stuff was in, he immediately put them into a black hollow oak tree because he didn't have a lockbox yet. Hey, how about just wait then? Like you're gonna dig them up and put them somewhere even more unsafe? The theory about that is that Joseph's prop plates weren't ready yet, so he was stalling, and he told Emma he had hid the real ones for now. But he did take the stones out and take them home, which is weird, and he would look into them to make sure that the plates were safe and not in danger of being taken. When Joseph Smith later went back to recover these plates he put in the tree, he had hidden them in his shirt, and on his way home he said he was attacked 3 separate times and hit over the head with a gun, but he managed to outrun them. Joseph, who had a permanent limp from a childhood surgery and was carrying about 50 pounds worth of metal, outran 3 grown men and had almost no injuries to show for it. He came back with a dislocated thumb, no head injury or rapid blood loss. Historian Dan Vogel says that he most likely hurt his thumb from finishing making the D-rings that bound the fake plates together. Like he's like doing all this work with his fingies. But sure, let's go off with you fought off 3 gunmen with the power of Christ, Joe. I could get into why the Book of Mormon translation story that the church tells is a pile of hot doo-doo, but that would take 3 more hours. The facts are that the church now acknowledges that Joseph Smith used folk magic and sear stones to procure and translate the Book of Mormon. And the biggest flaming red flag about that is, if the ancient Native Americans went to all that trouble to painstakingly carve down their history onto metal, or else it would all be lost, and they hid it from enemies so that it wouldn't be destroyed, leaving it for Joseph Smith to find, which supposedly brought danger to him and his family, just so that he could translate it with rocks. He did not even need the book. He wasn't looking at the plates and then translating it. In fact, no translating actually happened, and I'm not just saying that as a non-believer. It's just not technically what the church reports that he did. He literally looked into a hat behind a curtain and told his scribe what the book was saying. That's not translating, that is scrying, which he also wasn't actually doing. It's just such a huge hole in Joseph's story, and it makes absolutely no fucking sense at all. And if God can do literally anything, why can't he just make the words on the plates change into English so that Joseph could tell the scribe what the English translation was? It's just poor planning. Am I a better planner than God? And then Joseph said that the angel took back the plates once he was done with them, so bummer. But couldn't the angel just have given him the plates in the first place? Like they didn't have to be buried and hidden and all that stuff, and not have him go on a really weird, complicated treasure hunt for them? And if you ask any of these very valid questions in church, the answer you'll be given will be almost verbatim. We don't know why. God had a reason, blah 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 blah. Just have faith and pray about it. The reason the Mormon church is not completely transparent about Joseph Smith's magical worldview is because they know it would give members more questions than answers. And if you do not believe in Joseph Smith's and the church's final story of how the Book of Mormon came to be, then the entire system falls apart and they lose all credibility. If Joseph was making it all up, it means the priesthood is made up. Prophets aren't actually prophets. Spiritual polygamist marriages aren't real. Like, there's not one Mormon belief that can still stand if Joseph Smith was a crook and a liar and did not actually have these golden plates. And I don't think a lot of Mormons watch my content, but if just one member stumbles upon this video and starts to think critically about it, then I will have done my job. I may have very strong opinions, but I am not really trying to push people one way or the other. I just want the church to be honest and let members decide what they do with that information. But they certainly aren't going to, so I might as well. I am adding to all the voices who are willing to do it, because if the church ever admits that they lied or messed up, which they have yet to admit in their entire history, then they'll practically be admitting that they are not a church that is led by God. Again, all of my sources are linked down below. I highly recommend LDS Discussions, Mormon Stories. If you can get through that book, I'm sure it's really good. And thank you so much for watching. Guys, I'm officially monetized. Ooh! Which means I'm about to be 10 times more annoying. I do want to get on a more consistent posting schedule, and I want to talk more about current events that are happening. I'm not saying I'm never going to mention Joseph Smith or church history again. It just doesn't interest me as much as in what's currently going on. I'm glad I talked about this, but the fact that I don't believe in Joseph Smith anymore is not as relevant to me as the absolute fuckery that is going on in the Mormon church today. It is relevant in why the church is the way it is, but I want to work more on solutions that both Mormons and ex-Mormons have wrought up, and that slowly, 20 years down the line, the church will start to implement. Everybody say bye, Trixie and Rexy. And I'll see you guys very soon. It's baby kitten. Hi. Can you guys see baby mama? Oh, it's baby mama girl. Bye.